Welcome to the Author Roundup. This special segment of the Book Connection show features up-and-coming indie authors who sit down with us and talk about their recently released books. Join us as we chat with our next guest author. Hey there, everyone. Welcome to Author Roundup. I'm Emma, your host for today's episode. Today, I have an awesome self-published author, David Schweitzer. David Schweitzer used to spend his time writing, directing, editing, and starring in a YouTube comedy series, Skitcom TV. Now he's moved on to his new career that starts with his book, March of the Mystics. Hi, David. How are you today?
Hi, Emma. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great.
Yeah, thank you for being on the show. First off, I just want to say the cover is amazing, the book cover, and I can see in the background that you have it blown up, so it's perfect. It's very eye-catching.
Thank you.
So can you tell us a little bit about your book, March of the Mystics?
Yeah, so it starts with this guy, Gala Goda, who's a bit of a treasure hunter, and he's on the hunt for a diamond that this woman, Isra, he's got a bit of feelings for. He plans to steal this diamond for her and be like you, yada, 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 right? Well, on his way to the diamond, we call them mystics, but they're like
Mhm.
wizards. The three of
Okay.
them fall out of the sky and all of a sudden kind of join up with them because he's like, oh, these guys could probably help me out. So they go on their little adventure to get the diamond. And then from there, they kind of get sidetracked. If, Gala's supposed to go see her over here, he ends up trying to help them get over here to a castle. And on the way
Mhm.
to that castle, they learn it's about to be invaded by an army, and the castle has no defenses. So now it's up to them to kind of have to protect the castle. And it's like,
Okay.
oh, will Gala get to Isra in time to give her this and professes love and all that. And, so that's kind of the general gist of the story.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Gala for a second. So he begins as this lonely treasure hunter. How would you describe his personality and motivations at the start of the book?
I've always kind of looked at him a little bit. If somebody's familiar with this movie series or the actor and the Evil Dead, there's Bruce Campbell. I think your instinct with Gala, he's got a whip, he's got a gun, he's got a jacket. You might think he's like, oh, he's like Indiana Jones, he's Harrison Ford. He wishes. He's not that successful. He's a lot dumber, goofier, kind of just
Oh,
accidentally getting
that's
into
a nice spin.
things.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
but yeah, it pretty much starts with him, yeah, as a loner, and he's looking for something else in life. He's
Okay.
doing the treasure hunting his whole life, isn't finding it as rewarding anymore. And yeah, he's looking for connections.
Okay. And how, without giving too much away, how does his personality and his motivations evolve throughout the story?
Well, he definitely starts in a more selfish place. It's definitely one
Oh,
of
okay.
those, a person joins a team and goes from being like, I don't need you people to like, oh, well, maybe, without giving anything away.
Yeah.
So that's definitely his journey of, right in the first chapter, he talks about how he accidentally stumbled into this big war before and he was able to get out right away. And everyone's kind of like,
Mhm.
oh, so you're kind of like the coward. You weren't really helpful. And he's like, I just would have been killed if I was there. So, that really tries to cement where he starts to where he ends.
Okay. Okay, and you mentioned Isra, so you mentioned that he has feelings for this girl. How does his relationship with her drive the plot, and what do you think readers will relate to with his struggle to express his, like, emotions, I guess?
Well, so yeah, this is like a fantasy story, but I'm very influenced by a lot of movies more than books, to be honest with you. And
Gotcha.
I really like rom-com type stuff. I don't know if you're familiar
Yeah.
with Richard Linklater and the Before trilogy, like Before Sunset, Before Sunrise with Ethan Hawke and
Mm,
Julie Delpy.
no.
It's just two people walking around. I think they're in France, maybe not in America. I know they're somewhere foreign. They just kind
Okay.
of walk around all day talking, and
Yeah.
not much happens. Kind of like Seinfeld, So I really wanted like that element of people talking.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know he's a bit controversial, but I not personally, but film wise, I like Woody Allen movies a lot, where they talk a lot about relationships and
Yeah.
how it
Agree.
impacts us. So having the Isra plot line and there was really trying to get that side where I mean, none of us not, I shouldn't say none of us. Most of us haven't fought in like a war, right? None of us have fought dinosaurs. So those fantasy elements, people can't really relate to as much outside of like, I like this in movies or TV or books. But I
Right.
like the romance side, that's something, even if you're not with somebody, you've probably at least had feelings for somebody at one point. And I
Yeah.
think that is the important element that really grabs people and kind of drives them. Even if you don't see Isra in the story, she's brought
Yeah.
up periodically, and I think it really helps anchor him down to a more relatable and caring person.
I actually kind of like that. I like that it's not like a fantasy love story and that she's mentioned, but she's not like hugely part of the book. And it's kind of like it's interesting that she's brought up, like you said, because it's like it has a really cool spin on like POV and perspective and kind of like his conscience about like, oh, he's thinking about her, but she's not physically there. So that's really interesting. I like that perspective.
It was interesting because it felt like she was a character in the book. So,
Yeah.
and I like to try to keep like genders and races kind of a little more even rather than like
Right.
overwhelmed. So, it's three guys and two girls, but once you start mentioning Israel so much, it kind of evens it out a little bit more. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was a very helpful element. It wasn't there in like one of my first drafts. And once, because I think originally Gala was going to be one of the mystics who drops down. But then I had all
Mm,
these characters who had no backstory, no point of view, no entry, and it was just
okay.
everybody standing around being like, "What's this? I don't know. What's this? I don't know. What do we do? I don't know." So once I changed to Gala, like, no, he should be the point of view character. He should already be
Right.
established and not like them. And then it
Yeah.
was like, oh, yes, this love story could also be a really good way to drive the plot.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you made him the center because already from what you've described about him, everyone loves like the Indiana Jones type character, but it's nice that it's a spin-off, like he's like goofy and funny, and that always makes for good
Yeah.
reading, for
He's
sure.
the easiest one to write. I'd
Okay.
love for all the characters to get their own starring story at one point, but I definitely
Mhm.
don't feel as confident without
Yeah, that's great. So you mentioned one of the key elements of the story, the diamond
Barack.
Farak. Okay, yeah. So what does it symbolize for the characters and how does it play into the larger like adventure and conflicts they face, the characters face?
Yeah, so I mean, I probably chose a diamond just because, like in fantasy stories, diamonds are kind of cool to, as the MacGuffin, as they call them, the object you're
Yeah.
going after. As far as the name, and I hope I pronounced it correctly because it'll be so embarrassing I didn't. But for if you're familiar with Freddie Mercury from Queen, his real name is not Freddie Mercury. If Buzzle seems something, I don't know. I'm not that good of a fan apparently. Isra in the story is a musician, so I just kind of like to throw in little names to kind of have these weird little connections if somebody's aware of them. So,
Yeah.
that was kind of that. And just with it being musical, meaning a little more to her because of her background and stuff. So that was kind of
That's
why.
nice. Okay. I like all the little details, like Easter eggs and all that are so fun and exciting. And obviously, I feel like this book is very much you as far as like I just met you, but I feel like I can see like certain things that you like and things and just talking about it tied throughout the book. And speaking of the book and its title, the title is March of the Mystics. It's a very powerful title. I really like it. Can you describe the mystics and how these magical wizards, like you said, impact the story?
Yeah, the way I look at mystics is, they're a little bit of this, obviously powerful wizards. I
Mhm.
like this idea of them falling from the sky. And
Okay.
it's kind of almost like maybe you could equate them to a fallen angel. Like I'm not a religious person like that, but like it's not a bad analogy, almost as
Yeah.
if they were sent down for a purpose,
You can
you
see
know.
it, you can yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And what I've imagined is, way, way, way back, centuries, millennia ago, the mystics were a little more prevalent. They were in charge at one point. There was a reign of the
Mhm,
mystics. And then
mhm.
that kind of didn't go good because the, unlimited power, unabated power type thing. So they've kind of faded more into a myth. So they're not like everywhere. So when Gala meets them, he's not like completely like, what is this? But it's more
Mhm,
like, this is pretty rare because
mhm,
he hunts down a lot of treasures that prior mystics would have enchanted and cursed and yada yada for
mhm.
who was a mystic. So, he's at least aware enough and then uses them to his advantage.
Yeah. And what was the inspiration behind these mystics? How did this portion of the book come about?
They're just the Jedi. It's just me.
Just-
It's just me trying to combine Indiana Jones and Star Wars.
Oh my God, I love it. That's
That's
perfect.
probably, I mean, I'd love to say it's more creative than that, but if you look at the influences, they're more of
Yeah,
a Jedi type. I'm not trying to exactly make them that, you try to
yeah.
add stuff, but
Put
yeah,
your
if
own
you
spin on
yeah,
it. I
yeah,
mean, you said falling from the sky. They live in the sky. They live amongst the stars, so that makes sense.
yeah. So yeah, so that's probably kind of what I look at. The Gal a little more Indiana Jones, Bruce Campbell, and then these guys a little more Jedi,
Yeah,
Marvel superhero almost.
gotcha. Very cool. So let's talk about like the significance of the location. So you in your book, the adventures take place through the Forest of Light and the hidden castle you mentioned in the beginning. Can you talk about those significance and the locations and how they serve the story's themes of discovery and
Yeah, so the Forest of Light, my idea was just it would be really cool if there was like a forest full of like Christmas trees all lit up, with lights on them if they just kind of came naturally. I guess you kind of see some of that stuff in Avatar. I'm not a very big fan of Avatar, but like they've got bright forests and
super
stuff.
bright? Yeah.
So if you want to give James Cameron some credit for that, I guess. But yeah, I was really just thinking of how cool it would be like if you went to a place and there were all just these Christmas trees with Christmas
Yeah.
lights. I really like Christmas lights. I think they look really nice. So that was just, I thought, like a really cool fantasy setting. A
Okay.
lot of times, as people are on a trek in a fantasy book, they're going through something like the woods, and
Mhm.
having that more nature element was important with the mystics because I do consider them more not environmentalists exactly, but they have much more of an appreciation for nature in that element. And then as far as the hidden castle, partially I named it that because of the Kurosawa movie, The Hidden Fortress. So I kind of liked having that little Easter egg of something. And I
Mhm.
just thought it seemed like a cool idea if there was this castle within this magical forest that it kind of moves around, they say. The
Mhm.
forest kind of shifts around because of a spell. So, some of it was it just sounded kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it sounds awesome. So you mentioned a lot about inspiration from movies and things. Is there what's like your favorite like movie franchise of all time? Or what's something that you just like love that maybe has inspired writing or just like like we mentioned your YouTube like
Yeah.
skitcom TV, like where did
Yeah.
that
It's just trying to think. I mean, Spider-Man's my favorite of any kind of franchise thing. But it's funny because I was thinking about this recently. I'm like, I don't know how much Spider-Man influence is in this. Because
Yeah.
Gallus doesn't exactly act like Spider-Man, and nobody
Yeah.
else really does. So, but I think that you could even just take that larger and go Marvel in general. I read a lot of Marvel comic books. I've seen all the movies, even the bad ones,
Shows, all the
and the
all
shows.
the Disney shows.
Yep. But so that's probably because what I really like about Marvel, what I think they were really, really smart with and have succeeded is that they're funny movies,
Mhm,
especially starting with the first Iron Man movie. A couple of them
mhm.
before that, while they had some humor, it was a little less. But ever since
Right,
Iron
or
Man, they
yeah,
really went for like action comedies. And
yeah.
I think that's been very successful.
I feel like it balances it too, like, right? Like, it's not so, like, action-y and dark, it's more, like, comedic, which I really appreciate,
Yeah,
and
because I know people who aren't like comic book readers, they're not people who would typically go for that genre, but they'll enjoy those movies because they're funny enough and they like the characters enough. So that's kind of always been in the background of my head of like, okay, this story needs to be funny throughout. You can get serious and be dramatic at points, but in
yeah,
general, people need to feel like, okay, I'll at least kind of chuckle, helps
yeah,
people more likable. So yeah, I would say something like that.
it's really cool. So your story is filled with a lot of action and adventure, but also themes of sacrifice. How do you balance as a writer? How do you balance between these elements to create like both an exciting and meaningful story as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, with the action, you just kind of know, like, well, it's been a little while. Probably something needs to happen to kind of shake it
Yeah.
up. I don't really like writing the action. I like thinking of it and all
Okay.
that. Like picturing it in my head, it's cool. But then when I have to describe it and put in words, I'm like, ooh,
The
launch.
words. Yeah, it's like, oh, which word could I use for this to make it
Yeah.
super impactful?
You can only be like, he punched the guy like three times, and so whatever. So that can be challenging, I think, trying to find that. With the sacrifice element, that's where I at least start overthinking, at least with like the last act. The last act
Mhm.
of the story, like how do you wrap this up? How do you give
Right.
they gave something up, but they gained something, but not what they wanted.
Mhm. Yeah.
I wish I had a more scientific answer well on that one. But I think it's just that writer neurosis of like something else needs to happen here. And
Yeah. I mean, I feel like fiction writing in general, I mean, I'm not a writer, but I just feel like it'd be super hard to, yeah, try and balance everything, different elements of the story. So yeah, and especially like fantasy, like there's, vividness and descriptionary words and things. So I can see how it could be, like difficult to like balance everything and use the right word and things like that. But so let's talk about not necessarily the ending, but without giving too much away, how does Gala's final decision reflect his growth, and what message do you want readers to take away from his journey?
I think the message that I would probably hope people kind of take away from this story in general is that power of working together and
Mhm.
friendship. I think that really is a big element of it. Gal is a friendly enough guy, so when he first meets the Mystics, like, yeah, it's not like they're enemies or anything. Like, they're all getting
Yeah,
along. He's charismatic and social, but definitely some drama occurs where, oh, I
yeah,
don't know these people. Oh, wait, maybe I do. And I think even the Mystics themselves, the other three to four that show up, like they butt heads. There's three that fall in
yeah,
the beginning, and I really tried to write them as almost like siblings, where
yeah,
they kind of get annoyed with each other. What are you doing? Criticizing. So yeah, I think really more than anything, I'm just hoping because I think that's really important in life with everything
yeah.
is unity and not being divided and trying to
Mhm.
work together, especially with the people who are like literally on your team. That's kind of what I
Yeah, I feel like Avengers, that's what I thought of, like Avengers, togetherness and teamwork, so I'm
yeah.
sure that's where some inspo came from.
That's
Um,
usually a good plot for like a team movie of them like
exactly,
arguing but coming together. So yeah.
yeah, like there's conflict, but obviously it'd be nice to resolve and,
Yeah. Save the
yeah.
day.
Save the day, yeah. So, what, like, ultimately inspired the idea behind your book, March of the Mystics? Like, where did the inspiration come from altogether as, like, a unit?
Well, this kind of, I guess, goes back a little further. When I was a kid, The Phantom Menace was going to come out, the Star Wars movie. And I
Yes.
thought to
Your
myself, I
favorite
was like
one.
12 or something. Did you say that's your favorite one?
Yeah, it is.
Nice. It's good. I love it too. It's the best lightsaber fight anywhere and
I
best action
know, I
ever. I love it.
know. So
So
good.
I was a kid who was like loved George Lucas, and I was like, he's so lucky he's got this world to play in. And I knew I wanted to, be a writer or something in that field, right? Whichever form
Mhm.
it ended up taking. And of course, like in sixth grade, I'm like, oh, I just want to make a Star Wars thing. But I was at least smart enough to be like, you're not going to be able to. That's his thing.
Mhm.
Like Disney's
Yeah.
not going to buy it and just let people make movies on it every year. I was wrong there. So I was kind of at that point like, well, I guess I'll just have to create my own fantasy thing.
Right.
And that's when I created Gala and all the other, whoops, I'm sorry about that. All the other people, which why some of the names are like, what did like a 12-year-old come up with this name? Dad was phone? Like, yeah, a 12-year-old did come up with that name. And I mean, it originally started a lot different, because when
Yeah.
you're like
It
in
evolved, yeah.
yeah, and when you're in sixth grade, you're just copying Star Wars, and
Yeah.
slowly over the
Yeah.
years it changes, and more influences came in. Because I think when I was in sixth grade, it was very sci-fi, and then once I
Oh,
was in
okay.
high school, Lord of the Rings started coming out, and then I got more into some
Mhm.
fantasy elements. And then, like as high school continued, I got more into Marvel stuff. So they kind of evolved as far as like when this story of like they're gonna go save a castle. I don't
Mhm.
really remember. I know I started working on the first draft of this when COVID hit in like 2020. And I know
Mhm.
for a few years I had some ideas, but
Mhm.
I really can't nail down when I knew this exact story, at least the broad strokes. But it's definitely changed a lot. At one point, I was going to start the story like in a totally different spot, and then one day come back to tell a prequel that was like this of how the wizards got there or the mystics got
Mm.
there.
Mhm.
But that changed. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, I've been very happy with how it's all evolved. But yeah, it really has been a long, long
the
journey.
journey of it, yeah. Well, that's great hearing that you're happy with it. I was gonna ask, are you happy with, like, the final book and how everything transpired and everything? But it is really cool that it started out when you were a kid basically, and it's evolved into, different interests, different things. It's obviously more of, like, a mature, like, product, I would say, I'm sure because you're an adult, yeah, so that's really cool.
It's been nice, and yeah, it's been fun. So it's always been a good driving factor for me. In the back of my mind, it's always been like you got to tell that Gala Goda story. So it's for me, even if this went nowhere, it still feels like wow, I finally did the big story that
Yeah.
I'm supposed to do since I was a kid or something.
Yeah. No, it's very, I'm sure, super fulfilling, and you can call yourself an author, which is,
Yeah.
amazing. It's really cool. So what would you say is the target age or audience for your book? Like who do you want to pick up your book in the bookstore? Who do you imagine?
That's kind of funny because I really have thought about that, and it feels like an audience that I'm not ingrained in, but I really feel it's a story for like 10-year-olds and older. Like, I think
Okay.
an adult can enjoy it, but I tried to write it without swears, without like, gratuitous sex or anything. The violence is typically like he got slashed with a sword and fell down, not like he got slashed with a sword and the blood went like everywhere, dude. Like it was
Yeah.
spaces and so I think while there is some level of intensity, there's some short stories in the back, and one or two can be a little kind of creepy. I
Mhm.
still think anyone who's over the age of 10, I really think if you've got, a 10-year-old who's into some fantasy stuff, chapters are pretty short. I don't consider myself such a good writer that I'm writing at too high a level. Like, hey, I'm kind of an idiot too. I want this simple for all of us to understand and enjoy.
Yeah.
I definitely think if you're an adult who likes fantasy, action, I think it's fine for you as well.
Okay.
But I'm
Good to
really
know.
hoping to kind of get people in young so they have that childhood nostalgia for the rest of their lives, and
Oh
then
yeah, I like that. Like it was for you, like Star Wars was for you.
yeah. And also,
Yeah.
like, so many things, like, with Star Wars and Marvel, like, I have such fond memories of being a kid and being like, "Oh my god, they had this storyline going on, and they had a video game that tied into it or whatever," and it was just so much more fun. So,
Yeah.
it'd be wonderful if one day we had enough different types of stories and stuff like that, that some kid could just be like, "Oh my god, like, I'm swimming in all this stuff, and there's so."
Yeah. It's never ending, but in a good way. You mentioned in 2020, that was when you, like, officially kind of, like, started writing a manuscript, you said?
I think so, if I can remember
Okay.
the timing correct, because I think at that point it was like, well, I don't know if I can keep doing my comedy web series because I don't know,
Okay.
especially early 2020 when we were just like, we
COVID.
were going to see
Yeah,
somebody again. So
yeah.
I was like, well, books will still exist. So also knowing like no one's given me $300 million to make this, movie based off nothing with no fans. So like if you're going to create it, it's not going to become a movie or a TV show unless you create something else and become like, a rock star
Right.
from it, which is probably not going to
Yeah.
happen. But yeah, it was probably around then that I
Okay.
really tried to make it serious.
Okay. And what made you ultimately seek publishing? What about publishing a book caught your attention, I guess? I know you mentioned that you had this idea in the back of your head that you wanted to get out and you thought publishing was what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I'm not very good at the paperwork side of things. So like I didn't
Yeah.
look through like so I published it through Author House, which is a
Yeah.
self-publishing company. The process, from what I could research, the process to submit to like non-self-published, it seems insane. Like they have to either see
Yeah.
you.
Expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was like, well, if I'm gonna do this, like, let's make
Mhm.
sure it gets out.
Okay.
My
Yeah.
comic web series, we did about 75 episodes. We never had a budget. Sometimes I had to pay people with gas money or pizza or here's $30 or something, but we always
Mhm.
got it done and out. So that's always
Yeah.
been very important to me is like, if you're gonna do something, see it through and get it out.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so I
That's
think
true.
with the self-publishing, it really was just like, well, but I don't have to worry about rejection letters and have that psychological, like, oh, I'm not good
Yeah.
enough. It's
And
the
that mental
money.
load. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it was something that, when I signed up for it, it was during the pandemic and
Yeah.
just because I'm not going out in life, like I had the money where I could afford to do that. So yeah, so that was kind of how I decided that route.
Yeah, and also, I feel like with self-publishing, like authors, they don't want the traditional approach because they want the creative control over, their book because their book is so important to them. There's certain elements that, like they don't want to change. And like with traditional, like it can go into that route where your control kind of gets out of your hands. So a lot of authors really like the creative control of self-publishing and that you can, make the decisions about your book. Obviously, it has to go through editing and copyright and everything like that. But as far as like ideas and things like that, they maintain, control, which I think is very, very appealing for people, for writers.
Yeah, I'm more interested, at least right now, about being able to like tell my story, whether I did
Yeah.
it right or wrong. And,
Mhm.
I went through 2 rounds of editing with it. And, I definitely took notes. And if someone's like, hey, I don't think this makes sense, I wasn't like, to me it does. So forget you. I'm very receptive to the feedback.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I want to be able to make the call on the feedback and not someone be like,
Exactly.
no, listen, like this note you have to implement. So, and I mean, I don't think we have any decisions in it that are too controversial or anything where there would have been any major changes, but
Yeah.
I wasn't worried about that self-publishing aspect. And it really seems like it's the way a lot of people have to go nowadays.
Yeah.
Maybe the internet, social media, it's a little easier to probably market than it would have been in like the 90s or something or before.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so how long did it take you to complete your book, would you say?
That's tricky because like I submitted my last draft to it in August of 2023, well, last
Okay.
year. Then it was like about a year worth of them doing their editing and their stuff. So like the last year I haven't really worked on it.
Okay.
But sadly in 2021 my dad got sick and passed away, and that
Oh, I'm
really kind
sorry.
of had to like put it on pause
Okay.
for a little bit through that stuff. So there were some starts and stops as well. I can't
Yeah.
remember how good my progress was in 2020. And at one point, I also just put it away for maybe 8 months or something and worked on some other
Mhm.
stuff because then I could come back to it with some fresh eyes where I could appreciate things and go, no, that was bad.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Can you share any anecdotes of your writing experience or your writing process? What was your writing process like?
My writing process,
Or your routine maybe?
pacing, mumbling to myself, dressing myself down in a mirror. I don't think I have a necessary process.
Okay.
I quit my job. I had been working full time at a lab and I quit that about
Mhm.
2 years ago. So I've been kind of doing this full time for 2 years. And
Mhm.
honestly, even like 6 months ago, I felt like I was still just getting my routine down of like, I work a little part time job, which is just work from home. So, like, okay, how do I do that for a little bit? And then how do I
Yeah.
write? Because also, like, I don't really like writing like the book for like a 6 or 8 hour day. It's really draining. So I'm
Yeah,
finding
a
I kind of
lot.
have to have like 2 or 3 things that it's like, okay, I spent 2 or 3 hours on this, and now I'll look at this, and then I'll
Yeah.
edit that, which can be frustrating because you feel like, oh, I should just plow through and get this done. But for me, I just get too distracted and like, ugh. So
Yeah.
I
I
kind of,
feel like yeah, I feel like that's true. I feel like creatively, is that a word? Like, I feel like it comes and goes,
yeah.
right? So, ideas comes and goes, you can't force it, so I think that's yeah,
Like,
it's
and
fair.
I know for me in the summer, because there's a lot of summer blockbusters and action movies and stuff, my kind
Ooh.
of interest is a little bit more that. And then,
Oh,
in the winter when the Oscars come, I try to watch all the Oscar movies and stuff, and usually
oh,
have
me
no
too.
explosions or bullets. So
Yeah.
then it's like definitely a different side of me where I'm like, I just want to write about somebody who's depressed. You know? So I think also maybe depending on the season that helps. Right now, I'm trying
Okay.
to, since it's like Halloween and
Oh, yeah, that's cool. I like the way your inspiration comes, like, seasonally. That's really interesting. That's
yeah, it
cool.
helps a little bit.
Yeah. And so I mentioned that you are a writer, so you're no beginner to writer. Was it hard? Was this a hard book to write, or had you written anything prior to this that made it a little easier?
The thing that was hard about writing the book was writing the prose and the narration. What I actually probably do is I kind of started as a screenplay because that's how I'm most accustomed to. And then I just copy and paste it all over into the Word document. And then I start adding the narration. And then I start adjusting the dialogue as well because it's this weird thing I found. Like on a script, you'll be like, okay, this sounds right. But on a book, you'll be like, no, I think I need to, maybe not use a contraction or this or that. But that's how I kind of, because the dialogue side is not really too hard for me. I can usually, well,
Okay.
sometimes there's some scenes I can think of now where I just sat there like, fine. But yeah, that's usually I think that at least helps me get it going. And because
Yeah,
I do find the narration a bit of a hurdle, it helps me avoid that hurdle and get the like meat down, and then I can kind of
right.
sculpt it a little more.
Okay. What part of your book was the most fun to write? Do you have a moment that's your favorite in your book?
I don't know if I do. There's moments that like in my head I think are really cool, like if it was like in a movie and stuff, and the music
Mhm.
that I hear and the scenes I hear, but I'm always like, well, I don't know if I got that across with the book. I don't know if I have a favorite part of the book. I'm just thinking through it. There's a scene with Gala and Dagnarone at a bar, and they're just kind of talking about Isra and stuff. And I really liked that scene, I guess. I thought that was a very
Mhm.
good character-driven scene. There's no action. So maybe something like
That's a good
that.
answer.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I had no fun writing this. It was
It was awful.
it was awesome.
It
Please
was
buy
just
the book
really
and make it worth my time.
yeah, there you go. What's the nicest feedback or comment review you've received about your book, and how have people around you perceived your book, family and friends? What did they think about it?
They've been nice. I'm trying to think if there's been like anything in particular that stood out. And I feel like there was, and I'm forgetting it now. Probably somebody compared it to like something else that I like. And I was like, oh, yes, that,
Something else that I like.
that scene did seem very Tarantino-esque, didn't it? Yeah, but no, no one said that. But I mean, the reception's been just nice so far. I mean, it's pretty much been friends and family. It's been out since June.
Mhm.
So if
Nice.
other people are buying it, they just haven't like done the fanboy reach out to be like, your book was great. But yeah, I mean, everybody's been nice. I think they've all said that,
Mm,
it moves at a good pace. It's not bogged. A lot of times I think fantasy gets bogged down by like other details. So,
yeah.
like Lord of the Rings, I love it, but man, there's like a lot of information about
Mhm.
Bilbo's family and the Shire that like does not
Yeah.
matter to throw in that ring in the pit.
It's like, yeah, we don't need like 5 pages about
Well,
it.
when I
Well,
put short stories in the back of the book to build on the world and some of the characters.
no.
So
Yeah.
if you chose not to read that, you still get a full story without like a lot
Okay.
of the distractions. But if you decide
Okay.
to engage in that, yeah, you get just a little bit more. But yeah, I
What
think
was the info behind that? The short stories? That's really cool.
I honestly think it was partly being concerned about how to do the world building and not,
Mm,
like overdoing it. Because also,
okay.
like, I remember sending drafts to some people where they're like, you spent like a page describing the city. Why? Or like, the history of the city. And I was like, oh, that's what I was supposed to do. Like, it didn't really matter. It's like your
Yeah.
second chapter, nobody cares, and it didn't factor in. So I think it was just a way to be able to kind of take some of that information and still world build, but not like shove it down the throat a little bit.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah.
Cool. What what advice would you give a writer working on his or her first book, particularly a fantasy fiction novel?
I think regardless of the genre, it's just keep going and
Okay.
don't quit. Write your book. You can put it away even for a year or 2 years or whatever, and you can come
Mhm.
back to it with fresh set of eyes, as I said earlier. What I
Yeah.
like about that is sometimes I actually enjoy some of the writing, and like I'll
Mhm.
laugh at jokes, which always surprises me. Not all the jokes, but some of them I'll be like, oh, hey, that was kind of
Mhm.
funny. I didn't remember that, and that's really helpful. And
Yeah.
I think it's the main thing to know is it's probably like 95% of writers. There's some out there that aren't like this, but from my like actual experience meeting people, most of them all think that they're like a fraud, a joke, a hack, like not good. And
Mhm.
you gotta just go with it because like you're
Yeah.
gonna be very critical of your own work and you're not gonna
Yeah.
be able to be objective about it. But hopefully it does appeal to somebody. And that's I also kind of look at it like, what else am I going to do? Like, this is what I want to do. And it would be wonderful
Exactly.
to be making, however much money or whatever from it. But like, this is for me, this is just what I want to do, even though there are days where I'm like, I hate this. I don't want to write this. This is trash, but you just kind of got
Mhm.
to keep going with it because there are more rewarding days than not. And
Yeah.
even just finishing it without feedback or anything and to be like, I wrote 80,000 words or however many you get is a good feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what you mentioned earlier about just thinking about something constantly, like Gala and the story, I think just that in itself, like, it would just be such, like, a bummer to for anyone that's writing to have that constant, like, idea and not do anything about it, so just doing something is the best, option for you and your,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. If I died tomorrow, at least I would be like, hey, you got a Gala Goda
Well,
story
good.
out there. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like what you mentioned also about sometimes it's okay to, like, put it away because, when you come back, you can have that confidence, like you mentioned, like a joke you said, and be like, "Oh, I came
That
up
is
with that. Oh, cool. Like, that was actually really good." And that can give you confidence to, you know, continue writing and or critique your own writing in a sense, but gives you confidence at least, so that's
also with putting things away. I've read a lot about how our subconscious helps us work through problems. And
mm,
it's not always there immediately. So I think
yeah,
that's good, putting it away, not thinking about it, and then just kind of have it in the back of your mind because you could just wake up one day and be like, oh my God, I know what I have to do. Like this person needs
yeah,
to open this door instead of that door, and then everything works and
yeah,
divine
yeah.
intervention.
Yeah, sometimes there's no sense in rushing something when you just have a feeling that it should, happen when it happens, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you've got enough other stuff going on that you can focus on, I think the worst thing you can do is just not do anything. Like if you're just like,
Right,
I'm gonna put this
absolutely.
away for a year and not work on anything, that's not good. I'm not usually writing like two books at the same time. Like, okay, I'm writing
Mm,
the book, but I'm outlining other things, or
mhm,
so it's like different muscles and different things to get things in different ways. But
mhm.
I strongly recommend most people putting stuff away for at least a month or two at one point.
Yeah. So do you have any personal or professional book goals for the rest of this year or for next year? Do you have a second book, or did March of Mystics kind of have a cliffhanger ending, or is set it up for another book or maybe another genre or
What I tried to do with the end of March of the Mystics is it's a complete story. It's not a cliffhanger. But at
Gotcha.
the end of it, you definitely take a chapter where the characters are kind of talking and you're like, okay, I could see where some of this would go if we did
Okay.
more. And I'm just about done my drafts of the second book, which has Gala and Dagnarone in it on a ghost adventure. So yeah, so the books will continue, it'll probably take another year or so. I'd like that the next book to come out around like a Halloween time. So if I can get
Ooh.
for like next year, that'd be great. But otherwise, I might wait another year and then that
Mhm.
see like a couple books come out in quick succession or something like that.
Yeah.
But the next one I think would be a pretty good Halloween time book. What's really exciting, a little bit off, is we have a comic book prequel that will be coming out eventually with Gala and Isra in it on how they met.
Oh, that's so
Yeah.
cool.
So,
Nice.
yep, the Renan Shoddy, who did the cover art for us, is doing the comic book. So, if you like the cover art, we've got 5 issues of a
Yeah.
comic book coming out. That's
Oh,
really
so
fun.
good. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
We don't have a release date or publisher just yet. I'm working on the pitch to send
Yeah.
that out, but I'm thinking that it would probably hopefully start coming out early next year,
Mhm.
maybe mid next year. I don't exactly know how long it'll take from them to get it to print.
Yeah.
We've drawn all 5 issues. We're coloring the fourth issue. We're lettering the third issue. So like that'll come out one way or the other. That's really exciting. We've got the whole creative
Neat.
team of Renan Shoddy and Angel RD doing the colors. So we're very, very excited for that.
Very cool. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about your book cover. It's amazing. It's one of the best I've seen. Can you share more about the artists who contributed to your book
Yeah.
and kind of give us a glimpse of what might be coming next for you and your collaborators? The
Yes, thank
commission?
you. So yeah, like I said, Renan Shoddy is the artist name. He's from
Okay.
Brazil. He's worked on a couple of things. I know comic books and stuff he's done. Water Wars 2099. I think it's got a number there at the end, but if you searched Water
Oh,
Wars comic, you'd find it
we
by
get it.
TB
Okay.
Fling, which is really good. And I think Angel did the colors on it as well.
Very
And
cool.
we met probably about 3 years ago, I think, on a Facebook group of connecting comic book writers and artists. Yeah, it's a great group. And inside the book, there's like 5 drawings of the characters because I
Mhm.
wanted people to have a visual image in case I did a bad job describing them. They'd be like, oh, this has got to be, Gala. He's wearing the jacket. So it started off with him drawing the character of Yanti in the book, who's like a samurai type character, and it
Mhm.
was phenomenal. Originally, I was thinking like, oh, I'll probably have to find different people to draw the different characters. I might not get somebody to do all of it. And it was so good.
Mhm.
It was so good. I was like, oh my God, like, would you be willing to do more? And he was like, yeah, sure. And then I got scared because he drew one more character and then had another job. And for like a year, it was like radio silence. And I was like,
Um,
uh-oh, he's drawn 2 of the characters, but I need 3 more drawn. So what happens if I can't draw those 3? Do I get rid of one of these that he did? And then thankfully he was like, hey, I got an opening. I can do that. And then I was like, would you be interested in doing the cover as well? Because like you're just so good. And we were starting to get enough of a friendship going on and stuff.
yeah.
And he was like, yeah. And he asked me, it's like, well, what do you think about for the cover? And I just thought, like, well, we want the whole team on it. And
Mhm.
the cover's really not actually accurate for the book because they fight a dinosaur in a temple, not in the woods. But,
Oh,
it looks cooler being surrounded by these Christmas tree like, lights and everything.
yeah,
And
for sure.
so yeah, so we ended up working on that. And then I think what it was when he was finishing the cover, I kind of as, Hail Mary, I was like, what are you doing
Yeah.
next? Working on something? And
Mhm.
he was like, I don't know, I'm looking for a gig. And I was like, well, would you be interested in doing something with one of these characters? And what was funny was at first he thought I was talking about adapting the book into a comic, and he's like, "That's not going to work. That's comics are different than a book." And I'm like, "No, no, no, I get that. I don't
No,
want to
no, it's
do
separate. Trust
that."
me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then I was like, "Well, what if we did like a prequel with like one of the characters?" And because, like I said, he really liked Yanti. I
Mhm.
originally tried to do a comic book with him, but it just didn't fit. It didn't work. It was very hard to try to think of this idea of a guy who just fell out of the sky and then is the main character, nobody else around him. So I couldn't
Mhm.
get anything going. And then I realized I'm like, it's really Gala and Isra that the story should be. So then I pitched them that, which is, it's an Indiana Jones type adventure. They're going on this adventure to get these daggers that are very powerful. It could leave the world in two, as they say. And he really liked it. And, we started working on that in April of 23, I'd say. And
Mhm.
he just finished up his side recently. And like I said, everybody else is still, going along the assembly line with it. But it's looking really good. Really,
That's awesome.
yeah.
That's cool. So I'm so interested, how does a collaboration like that work? How did it go? Did he pull ideas from just you initially telling him what you wanted out of these characters, or did he have more like free range?
It was a bit of both. I mean, I would pitch him, I'd say, like, okay, Gala has a yellow jacket, this,
Okay.
white safari shirt, blue jeans, red sneakers, gun and a whip. And I sent like some references with certain things and certain characters.
Okay.
I'm kind of thinking of like this, but then he really kind of did it. I know he definitely added some flair and some ideas and stuff, but at this point, I feel like we're very much in line. Like it,
That's good.
yeah, we're both kind of on that same page. We're both looking for a similar sort of thing, which is interesting because
Mhm.
it's kind of modern but kind of fantasy. And I was like, that might be hard to like really pull off. I don't know how the looks will look and stuff. And I think
Mm.
he's done it quite well, really. So
Yeah. Very cool. That's so cool. It's exciting about the comic books too. Oh my gosh. I feel like that is so like interesting that you're taking a comic book approach and you like grew up, reading
yeah.
comic books, so it's like full circle. So that's really, really fun.
Yeah, I'm really excited for hopefully a year from now to be like, there's a comic book, there's a book, there's another book, maybe there'll be another
Yeah.
comic or something. Because, I think fantasy also is such a visual medium that it's
Mhm.
kind of a shame it's in books. And like,
Yeah.
I mean, there are successful fantasy comics, but it's not really it's not the big genre in comic books. Superheroes are. But I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of people I know who read tons of superhero comics and all that, but never fantasy.
Yeah.
So, and I think, like I was saying, some of that sometimes is the fantasy just bogs you down with so much detail, and it's not easy
Yeah.
to. So I think some of that could be the issue, but yeah, I'm excited to have the visuals out there, especially to be like, oh, well, if you read the comic book, you know actually what this,
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
And and I feel like that's such an interesting and a really cool challenge as the artist to kind of bring, those bogged down scenes and pages like to life with just one, page of a picture. Like and try and capture as much visually through the words, in the beginning. So that's kind of like a fun challenge for
Yeah.
artists.
And Renan is a phenomenal storyteller. I mean, he knows where to put the camera, where to put the shot, how to get the emotion out of the face, which is, that's a whole different skill.
Mhm.
And he's done double page splashes beautifully, 9-panel grids. We really tried to use a lot of the, comic book storytelling techniques with each page and stuff. And
Oh,
I mean, for my first as a big comic book guy, and then this being my first comic, like I could not be happier with
that's
the
great.
art in general. I really loved how the John Carter of Mars books look because they have the Frank Frazetta covers, and they make your imagination like, what is in this book? This looks
Yeah.
amazing. And I really feel like we have something not quite on Frazetta level, okay, maybe not quite there, but I do feel like if I was my mom had the book on her kitchen table and I walked past, I was like, I want to read that book. And I was like,
Mhm.
you don't need to. You know what happens. But it just looks so good that I
Yeah.
love it. Thank God for him.
That's really cool. That's so cool, and hopefully, fingers crossed that you could make maybe you could make fantasy comic books a thing and more, like, popular. That would be really
It'd be
cool.
great. At least this one. And other people they can do it themselves. But yeah, this
Yeah,
one would be great if fantasy adventure took off
yeah,
and a little
so
bit.
cool.
So
Awesome. Well, I think that's all the time we have today. Is there anything else you wish to leave with our readers today?
if you want to find us on Facebook and Instagram, if you search Gala and the Mystics, you'll find our
Oh, okay.
pages come up. There'll probably be like a TikTok and other stuff soon. I just kind of got to get on.
Right.
So, but if you're ever looking for us on social media, Gala and the Mystics, I figured
Okay.
that's probably the best way to draw people over there. And those pages will give you any updates, new work coming out, comics, books, whatever. We also have like a Shopify account where you can get bookmarks, posters, stuff like that. We'll probably have
Ooh,
stuff there. But yeah, if you do pick up the book and read it, if you could give us like a review on Amazon,
yeah,
I would be so
yes,
grateful. And then if
that
you
would be great.
see me at a signing and you're like, I left the review on Amazon, I will take care of you. But yeah, anybody who does read it, thank you. Really appreciate it. Even if you read it and don't like it, guys, thank you for going through the whole thing then. And thank you for interviewing me. This was wonderful.
Yeah, of course. This has been great. Awesome. Well, thank you, David, for your time. Your book is very exciting, and I know that anyone who would read it would be very entertained and transformed. So you can purchase March of the Mystics through authorhouse.com and also Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And yes, if you purchase and read it, please give a review on Amazon or authorhouse.com. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you next time.